I kind of like thinking about that idea of emotional bandwidth, because that's kind of what it's like. If we think about our brain as having a certain capacity that's available to us every day, we don't want to push the limit of that capacity too much. We're sort of placing it on stretch too often. But unfortunately, when we've got all these different changes that are happening during perimenopause, we've got the sleep changes, the hormonal fluctuations, the day to day life stress. A lot of that capacity is being used up before we even get out of bed in the morning. So, what we tend to find is that if your kid forgets their lunch when they go to school, or another whingy email comes in, or someone left the dishes in the sink instead of putting them in the dishwasher like a normal person would, it's not really the problem. It's just the final straw that's landed on that overloaded system.
Welcome back to Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier, the editor of Prevention, and we're thrilled to have you joining us today. Now tell me, have you ever found yourself wondering, what has happened to me? Or when did I become this person? Maybe you've noticed you're more easily overwhelmed, more emotionally reactive, or that things you used to juggle without a second thought suddenly feel like too much. If that sounds familiar, you're certainly not alone. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by clinical psychologist Narelle Dickinson to explore why midlife can leave us feeling like we've lost our emotional edge. We'll be looking at the connection between our hormones, brain, and nervous system, why our resilience can seem to disappear, and what stress and burnout really look like during this stage of life, and why it can contribute to the menodivorce phenomenon. Most importantly, Narelle shares practical, compassionate strategies to help regulate your nervous system, restore your emotional bandwidth, and start feeling more like yourself again. Narelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Now, for so many women, one of the hardest parts of perimenopause, it's not just the hot flushes, it's feeling like they've suddenly just become less capable. Why does this transition seem to affect our resilience so profoundly?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a big shock for a lot of women that it isn't really about hot flushes. It's sort of what we're all told, but it's it's not the least of our worries, but it's certainly not the only worry. And I do think it's a big misconception that there tends to be such a big focus on physical symptoms, but really for a lot of women, it's the emotional and cognitive changes that cause the most distress. And we know that the emotional symptoms can actually start years before we start to notice the first physical symptom, like a hot flush. So for a lot of women, they just don't even really understand what's going on. It feels like it's come out of nowhere. And it's really not that women suddenly become less capable. That's not is that you haven't lost your mind. That's not what's happened. It's that all of a sudden the systems in the brain that help us to regulate our emotions and manage stress and think clearly just get a little bit less efficient during this period of time. And at the same time, around this age, most women are carrying massive loads. We're in what we describe as the squeeze generation. We've Some of us are still raising kids. We've often also got responsibilities for our older parents. We're still working. We might have partners that we're trying to be available to and try not to kill them on the bad days. And so self care tends to be the last thing on the list for a lot of women, and we end up neglecting ourselves. So it really isn't just hormones, it's hormones interacting with this really full life that most of us are leading.
Yeah, for sure. The perfect storm. Now, can you explain what is happening in our brains and nervous systems during perimenopause that makes us feel so emotionally stretched?
Yeah. So you'd all know that we're just basically big bags of hormones and neurotransmitters walking around, getting on with our days. And without getting too medical, it's really important to remember that hormones don't just affect our reproductive system. They influence all parts of our bodily function, including how our brain works. When we're thinking about perimenopause, the two hormones we probably talk about the most are estrogen and progesterone. And estrogen actually supports many areas of brain health. It influences the activity of neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine. and they play really important roles in mood, motivation, concentration, and emotional regulation. And it also helps support memory and cognitive function. So if you're wondering why you've got that brain fog feeling, that's probably got something to do with estrogen. Progesterone has a bit more of a calming influence on the nervous system. It interacts with the brain pathways that are involved in relaxation and sleep. So many women notice that they feel calmer or sleep better when progesterone levels are stable. So if this is ringing some bells about what's happening with your sleep, that might be progesterone. So it's normal for us to have fluctuations in these hormone levels. It happens every month in line with our menstrual cycle. But during perimenopause, the hormones start to decline, and that's just a normal part of our aging process as women. Unfortunately, they don't decline in a smooth, predictable way. They fluctuate, they jump all over the place, sometimes quite dramatically. So that means sometimes one week you'll be feeling perfectly fine, completely normal, recognize who you are. And the next week you are irritable, you're anxious, you're bursting into tears over something that normally wouldn't bother you. And you've got that sense of, I don't even know, I don't even recognize myself. And at the same time, we've got the impact of sleeping less well because of the night sweats, the hot flushes, and waking more frequently. And then poor sleep makes it harder for our brain to regulate emotions and concentrate and recover. So it just becomes this kind of nasty cycle that we're stuck in.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, it explains, I guess, why even relatively small problems can just suddenly feel like enormous.
Absolutely. Yeah, because this poor little nervous system that we have is suddenly, its normal support systems are just out of whack, and we get a lot more sensitive. So we're not suddenly incapable, emotionally weak. It's our normal buffering system that the brain uses is not working so efficiently, and then those little everyday stresses, like you were just saying, start to feel much bigger and harder, and the emotional reactions that we're having can be stronger. Then we're in the middle of all this other busy stuff, so we've got all the other things we're dealing with too.
Yeah. So you've mentioned the nervous system. It's something we're hearing a lot more about these days. I think it's still a bit of a mystery to most of us, just what it is and how it works. Can you explain how a dysregulated nervous system shows up in everyday life? I mean,
Yeah,
are there signs that we should be looking out for that are saying, apart from obviously snapping at everyone and feeling like this, but are there other signs we should be looking out for?
yeah, I kind of like thinking about that idea of emotional bandwidth, because that's kind of what it's like. If we think about our brain as having a certain capacity that's available to us every day, we don't want to push the limit of that capacity too much. We're sort of placing it on stretch too often. But unfortunately, when we've got all these different changes that are happening during perimenopause, we've got the sleep changes, the hormonal fluctuations, the day-to-day life stress, a lot of that capacity is being used up before we even get out of bed in the morning. So what we tend to find is that if your kid forgets their lunch when they go to school, or another whingy email comes in, or someone left the dishes in the sink instead of putting them in the dishwasher like a normal person would, it's not really the problem. It's just the final straw that's landed on that overloaded system.
Yes, yes, indeed. Now, where does cortisol fit into the picture? So that's another thing that we, hear a lot about. We hear it blamed for a lot of things, but what role does it genuinely play in this whole, interwoven cycle?
Yeah. Poor old cortisol.
I
It gets
know.
blamed for
It's got a
everything,
hard
doesn't
rap.
it? Yeah, no one loves cortisol, but it's actually a really important hormone. We need it. It helps us wake up, respond to challenges, manage everyday demands. It's the thing that, if we're driving down the road and the car in front of us suddenly brakes, cortisol's what stops us having a rear ender. So don't be too hard on
Thank you,
cortisol.
cortisol.
Yeah, thank you, cortisol. The issue is not cortisol. It's when our stress response is being activated so often that our bodies don't get the chance to recover. So you've got to remember that our bodies are actually still relying on the same threat management systems that we developed thousands of years ago, when the types of threats and the number of threats we had to manage were really different. So our cave woman ancestors never had to juggle quite what we're doing. Our lives have changed, but our hormone systems, including the way cortisol is being used, has just not evolved. So, in our relentlessly triggering modern world, our cortisol system is still being triggered the way it was before. It's just that now there's so many triggers, they're coming at us so often, we never have that chance to catch up and recover in between. And the recovery is a really important part of it.
Yeah. So, can chronic stress during midlife actually change the way our brains respond to everyday situations?
Yeah. Unfortunately, and it's not even just during midlife, it's at any point of our life.
Mm.
When we're in chronic stress, our brains become actually more hyper tuned to potential threat, and we can actually start to get a bit hyper vigilant and hyper reactive. So, when we've been under pressure for months or years, the brain becomes really, really good at spotting problems. Our brain is effectively a problem solving machine because it's trying to protect us all the time. So, again, if we think about it from that evolutionary perspective, our cavewoman ancestors weren't actually running away from predators every 5 minutes. But in our modern world, it feels like there's a predator around every corner. There's a predator embedded in every email and every phone notification that's popping up on our watches and our phones. And so that means we start reacting much more quickly to situations that probably shouldn't be affecting us that much. But the good news is our brain is an adaptable thing. It's pretty plastic, so our patterns can improve if we give ourselves the chance.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, like things like burnout, chronic stress, hormonal changes, they carry very sort of overlapping symptoms. So, is there any way we can kind of, pinpoint what is triggering us or, tell the difference between what's going on?
It's a really good question, Zoe, and it's one I actually get asked pretty often, kind of a "what's wrong with me" question. The answer is probably a little bit too often, I'm not exactly sure, and that's because they all do look alike, and they overlap a lot. And I honestly, I think we can probably waste a lot of time trying to figure out, is it stress? Is it burnout? Is it hormonal changes? When probably it's a little bit from all of the above. So I would tend to encourage women to think more about, the interaction of factors and remember that hormonal changes make us more vulnerable to stress. Chronic stress will worsen sleep, mood, concentration. Once we're not sleeping well, we're back in that nasty cycle, and burnout just makes everything harder. So I don't think we can narrow it down to a neat answer there.
For sure. Is it accurate to say then that hormones don't necessarily create these feelings that, of overwhelm, but they lower our capacity to cope with maybe stress that we have been carrying for many years?
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Women are pretty wonderful creatures, really. We've been coping brilliantly forever. And we don't hit 40 or 50 or whatever it is when menopause strikes and suddenly all of life's pressures land on our heads. That's not how it works. It just reduces the margin that we have for absorbing them. So it's like we've been walking around carrying a backpack and it's been getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And all of a sudden, we just can't carry the load anymore. Something's got to give.
Yeah. All right. So that's the picture. So, what are some simple ways that women can start regulating their nervous system that doesn't, involve disappearing on a wellness retreat for 10 days, which would be very nice,
Isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
but out of reach for most of us?
Yeah, it'd be really nice to slip off to a retreat in Bali every fortnight or so, but I think if we could do that, we probably would be sufficiently well resourced that we didn't feel too stressed anyway. So, well, maybe one day we'll be there. The good news is regulation doesn't have to be that complicated or maybe
Expensive.
frightful.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I think really it's going for a 10-minute walk, spending a bit of time outside. We talk about vitamin blue and vitamin green, getting into the sea, getting into nature. Prioritizing sleep where you can. I know it's not always possible, but sleep is such a magic thing. There's a reason sleep deprivation is a form of torture. So, we do need sleep. Slowing your breathing when you notice tension. So becoming a bit more aware. I can't believe how often I talk to women and teach them breathing techniques, and they realize they probably have not breathed properly for years. They actually have not felt themselves empty their lungs properly forever. Eating regularly and trying to eat reasonably well most of the time. I love chocolate. I'm not saying you're not allowed to eat chocolate, but it is, trying to eat fairly healthy most of the time. Trying not to multitask. Women tell ourselves that we're really good at multitasking, but my goodness, that takes up a lot of bandwidth because we're actually not really doing multiple things at once. We're just really rapidly switching, and that's exhausting. And I think there's another really important thing, which is connecting with the people who make you feel safe rather than judged, because that's just too much work, really, isn't it? Hanging around people who are hard work. So, you know, making that time for the positive social interactions. I think that if we can put in place, I know some of those things seem really small, like a 10-minute walk. What difference could that possibly make? But if we're putting small, consistent habits into place, they're going to outperform the big grand gestures like a health retreat in Bali. And I also think it's really important to be realistic. If we're already super stretched and we set ourselves up for massive, big self care goals, we're probably just setting ourselves up to fail. And it's another thing that's going to burden the bandwidth is that sense of, I couldn't even do that properly.
For sure. I mean, I think people often feel like they need to push through this stage, women, like, as we've always pushed through everything. But I guess rest is really something that is becoming more important at this stage of life too, isn't it? Just actually being able to step back and really pause.
100%.
Mm,
We seem to have got into this mindset that rest is a reward that we're allowed to have when everything is finished. But biologically, rest is just how our nervous system recovers so we can function. So if we wait, like, when is everything finished? I don't think my laundry has been finished for in maybe 1993. I got to the end of my laundry. So rest is not laziness, it's maintenance. And just to borrow from a cliche, you cannot pour from an empty cup. You
mm.
need to rest.
Yeah, and I think some women don't even really know how to rest, to be honest. Like, it's like, is that sleep? Is that what is
Yeah.
that suiting? What would you say are some good ways to rest? That because I think there are things that we can be doing that we think might be resting that actually are doing us no favors. Doom
Yeah.
scrolling, for example.
Yeah, and we've all kind of got into that. It's a real, it's almost like an avoidance dissociation strategy for a lot of people, but it's actually revving up our nervous system, not quietening it down generally. So I think, I've referred to some of them already when we've got constant notifications coming through. I can't believe sometimes when I'm sitting in a session with someone, how many times their phone pings and I'm feeling distracted by it, and it's not even my phone. I actually can't imagine having that much dysregulation happening. I wear a smartwatch thing, and it actually I have most of my notifications switched off, and it still drives me up the wall because it is still going all the time. A lot of us just never have uninterrupted downtime, so trying to put that in place somehow. I talked about multitasking already. um, this is a very, very female thing, but saying yes when actually we mean no. Saying, "Oh, yes, I can do that for you," when we're actually thinking, "My plate is so full, I have nothing left," and then we still, do what we can. Um, and then trying to juggle all of that by skipping meals, skipping exercise, skipping a social catch up with our friends because we've got a work deadline to get to, not sleeping properly. And I think there's another one which we could probably chat about for an hour on its own, but it's the constant stream of distressing news that again is coming through our phones and our watches, and it's around it. The world is often a really scary place, and that is and the media cycle is extremely good at presenting that to us relentlessly. And that is really, really, loading to that sensitized nervous system. So no one of these things is catastrophic on its own, but if we put them all together, that nervous system is just switched up into hyperdrive just constantly.
Yeah. So when you're working with women in this stage of life, what do you find makes the biggest difference? Is it those simple things that you've mentioned earlier?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there isn't a single magic trick. If there was, I would do one session with every person and then I would never need to see anyone again.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that we help women to stop seeing themselves as broken. That is so unhelpful, that sense of, there's something wrong with me. Because as soon as we can understand what's happening, we're probably increasing our capacity to start being a bit kinder to ourselves. And then we can start reducing stress that's not necessary or that, the level of stress that we're experiencing. We can start setting up the environment that improves our recovery. We can start setting boundaries. The number of people who say, I'm really good at setting boundaries, it's just keeping them I have trouble with. Um, and starting to respond to themselves with the same compassion that they would show anyone else, but just giving a bit of that back to themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Now, when it comes to setting boundaries, I mean, as you said, many women find themselves becoming less tolerant of behavior that maybe they've put up with for years. Do you think that is part of the reason we're hearing more about this so-called menodivorce phenomenon?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I think I think there's probably several things happening. Women have less emotional energy to keep smoothing over problems or putting everyone else's needs first. And I think a lot of us start to get a bit resentful underneath all that too, when the hell is it going to be my turn kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that hormones are causing relationship breakdowns though. That's a really important distinction. It's probably a bit more that at this stage of life, we're starting to take stock of what is and is not working in our relationships. And I think the other thing is our world's changed a lot. I'm 54, and the things we socially accepted as normal behavior 30 years ago are simply not the same now. And I actually think that a lot of what we accepted in our relationships back then when we were younger is just no longer something that we see as acceptable. And unfortunately, I don't know that our partners always kind of cue in and catch up with how we're feeling to that. So that definitely gets in the way.
Absolutely. So, if there were partners or family members listening, what's the most important thing that they should understand about what's happening during this transition?
Yeah. Firstly, she is not moody or being difficult. That is not going to be a helpful approach. For a lot of women, this is a genuine neurological and emotional transition. Something is really changing in her body, and she is trying to make sense of it herself. So, calling her names like difficult and moody is definitely not going to be useful. Um, the most helpful thing they can probably do is not try to fix the problem. It's try to approach it with an attitude of what would help. Um, be curious, be patient. When we feel understood, it's incredibly regulating. So if you can approach her and think something is happening, what what is it that I can do to support, not fix, but support, can be really useful. And it might also require them to reassess what load they have been adding to her life and whether there's any adjustments they can make to lighten that load.
Mm, for sure. I mean, there's a chance that partners aren't listening to
Hmm.
this podcast. So, what is the best way that a woman can sort of navigate trying to decide whether her marriage is worth saving at this point? Any advice?
Just a quick question in 30 seconds or less. Is my marriage worth saving?
Exactly.
Woo, no pressure. Look, I'd probably just encourage women to stop asking themselves what's wrong with me.
Yeah, yeah.
Instead, start asking, what does my nervous system need right now?
Yes.
And then we're taking a shift away from self criticism towards self care. Sometimes the answer might be, actually, I just need to sleep, or I need to move, or I need to say help, or I need to say no. It
I need to
might
speak
be
up. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
really big word that starts with an N and finishes with an O that we all seem to have a struggle with. If we listen to those signals, we probably gonna start to feel a bit more like ourselves, and then we've probably got a bit more space back to answer some of those other really big questions, like,
Yes.
a relationship worth saving.
Absolutely. Finally, what's one small thing that someone listening today could start doing this week to feel calmer, more resilient, more like themselves again?
If I was if I was going to give one piece of advice, I would say, turn off whatever you're listening to this on, go put the kettle on, sit down, stare at some trees, have a cup of tea, and do nothing else for the next 15 minutes. Do not put a timer on. Just stare at some trees and just let yourself breathe and remember what it's like to just stop.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
did that once a day. It's gonna make a difference actually, without anything else.
And that's a nice thing to do, isn't it? Cup of tea's
Cup of tea?
always. Well, on that note, that brings this episode to a close. But Narelle, thank you so much for sharing that. There's so much good advice in there. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Okay. That brings this episode to a close, but we really hope that you've come away from this conversation feeling reassured that you're not imagining it and that there are simple, effective ways to navigate this transition with more calm and confidence. If you liked this episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And for more great advice on living your best life at midlife, be sure to pick up a copy of Prevention Magazine. I'm Zoe Mernier. See you next time.